Hello everyone, my name is Dimitri, and in this live on-demand webinar I'm going to show you some of the ways that you can use to analyze a network in InfraNodus or in general in any tool. I'm going to show some of the technique that you can use in analyzing a network, in defining what are the main influential nodes, in finding the main communities, in detecting the relationships between the different clusters in the graph, and also demonstrate some of the advanced techniques that you can use to identify the most interesting nodes that might be not so obvious, but that may still be relevant for your research. I'm going to use InfraNodus software. If you have any questions, you can ask them online on YouTube, on Facebook, or with the hashtag InfraNodus on Twitter. I will be monitoring them and try to answer them live. So let's go to InfraNodus. As you can see, this is the visualization of a network. In this particular case, it's a very well-known example actually, because it's a social network of the Victor Hugo novel, Les Misérables, and it shows the relationships between the different characters. It's an example which is typically used when we're working on analyzing a network. So this is kind of like a general overview of the connections between the characters of the book. By the way, if you want to do the same and visualize it yourself, you can always go into InfraNodus. You can also use a software like Gephi as well, and you just import the gex file here through this app, choose the type of network, undirected in this particular case, and then you will see the graph. It's going to look something like that. Again, as I said, you don't have to use InfraNodus for that. If you prefer any other tool like Gephi or Budget, then you can use it as well. Then the next step is that you visualize the network. You have an overview of the relationships between the different characters. The first thing that is usually nice to do is just to look at the graph, even hide the analytics panel, and just try to get some interesting insights from the graph. We can see that there is these two main characters here, Marius and Valjean. And then there's also an interesting one here, Muriel, which is kind of like existing on its own. This one is interesting because it's connecting two different groups together. And we also have Gavroche, Enjolras, Thénardier here, which are less relevant and a lot more of even less relevant characters in the graph. So now the next step that can be interesting to do is to look at the analytics panel and see what are the most influential nodes inside. Usually if you use another software like Gephi, you would look at the nodes that have the highest between centrality or the highest page rank, depending on the measure that you would like to use. But we usually like to use between centrality because it's a measure of how often a node appears on the shortest path between any two randomly chosen nodes in the network. So this is quite an interesting measure because it shows you the crossroads in between the different clusters that exist in the graph. And in this case, you see it identifies three elements. By the way, in InfraNodus, it doesn't just show you top n nodes. It actually uses an algorithm which is called Jenks. It's explained here, Jenks elbow cutoff algorithm. You can read more about it if you click on the question mark. And what happens here is that it analyzes a sort of like the distribution of influence among all the nodes and finds the top several nodes, but not too many, that would have the highest measure of influence. And this is why there is 3 nodes here. There could also be 4 or 2, depending on the relevance of those nodes. But in this particular case, it's 3. And then what I also want to show you that's quite important that I should mention is that in fact, you can construct this network also manually. As you can see, InfraNodus by itself is a text network analysis tool. So you type in a text, and then it visualizes the text network graph as a result. But you can also use hashtags to create the connections between different nodes. So for example, here, it converted this original GXF file into a sequence of hashtags, where every relation between every character was encoded as a hashtag. So for example, one name is Babette Gulemer. Then you see it's quite a lot of relationships between these these two characters. So the relationship is quite strong. But for example, then you have also Claquesous and Valjean, and then you have Claquesous and Javert, So you can actually encode a graph manually using the same approach. Just type in a hashtag, you say that John is connected to Jack, and then it's going to draw these two nodes and the connection between them. So also it's a very good way to build connections manually between the nodes. Then what we can do next is to look at the rest of the influential elements. So here you can click on InfraNodus on this button and see all the other influential nodes and analyze the graph based on this information. So for example, you have Valentin, you have Marius here, you have Fantine. Okay, so this one is interesting because it looks smaller, but as you can see, it connects the network to a unique cluster that almost nobody else connects this network to in the same efficient way. This node connects them as well, but he's not too connected to the influential ones. So this is why he's less influential. This one is more influential because he's connected to Valjean and Thénardier. Okay, next step is to look at the main topical groups. You can see that the graph has different colors. This is because every color indicates a community in the graph. So what is the cluster of the nodes that are more densely connected than with the rest of the network? So as you can see, these nodes here are really densely connected between each other, but not with the rest of the network. This is why they get a designated color, which is separate from the rest. If you click here, then you see only this particular cluster and all the relationships that belong to that cluster. If you click on this little square here, then InfraNodus selects the top 3 influential nodes in this cluster and shows you the connections between them. You can also click them, of course, one by one and analyze what are the relations between them. So the next step that can be interesting to do is to look into all these main clusters and see what are they actually. And then depending on your knowledge of the source material, this might lead to quite interesting insights. If you're interested in more groups, this is an interesting cluster here. You see it exists on its own kind of, and the most influential node inside is Miriel. And then if you click on expand, you will see the rest of the communities of the clusters detected in this graph. The next interesting step to do is, once you understand the community structure of the graph and you see the most influential elements, is to start deleting the most influential nodes from the graph and seeing what's hiding behind them. However, you can also do one other thing before you do that, is if you click on the Insight panel, if you use any other software, I will explain what the approach here is, but basically it analyzes a structural gap in the graph. So it looks into the 2 clusters. If you press Shift, you can select them at the same time, which could be connected but are not yet. And it identifies it as a structural gap in the network. And usually in social sciences, this is where a new potentially interesting connection could be created. So for example, now the only node that connects them to is Valjean. This is why he's so influential. So if you were to become a node that would connect these 2 clusters together, you could also be quite influential and connect these 2 simultaneously. Okay, so this is a structural gap. You can also click this button here, reveal the gap. If you're using any other software, just look at the network, look at the different communities, clusters of nodes, and see what are the existing gaps. So you can even do it manually. For instance, this one, maybe, no, these are connected. Let's see, maybe this one and that one. Yeah, so for example, these 2 could also be connected in a new and interesting way. To select them at the same time, I'm pressing and holding the Shift button. Then the next step is to delete the nodes, as I say. So this is something that we like to do in the analysis. Just select the most influential ones. and delete them from the graph, you can use this button here, or you can also click reveal the non-obvious, so it kind of deletes the most influential elements and shows what's hiding behind them. Here I will use normal way. Okay, so then we see what happens if we remove these three most influential nodes from the network, which are the other ones that are also influential if these ones didn't exist. So they're kind of usually like very interesting nodes because they indicate what individuals or nodes in the network have influence that is not so obvious from the first side. Okay, so for example, Javert is influential here, and then Thénardier, Cosette, and so on. And then you can reiterate the same analysis approach. So you look at the most influential elements, the main topical groups, the structural gap, and so on. Then you can even delete more influential nodes. So for example, I click here, I delete those three. As you can see now, they're all deleted from the graph. And we see what are the other ones that are also influential, that are hiding behind this node here. So in general, I found that this approach of deleting the nodes from the graph and looking what's hiding behind them is pretty interesting because it allows you to get past the most obvious insights, because if you know your data, you will know what are the most important and most influential nodes. But when you start deleting them from the graph, there are some interesting patterns that tend to come up that can be very interesting for your research, and that can help you identify some new interesting patterns and connections in your data. The next step that you can do that is also quite interesting, and these are the hidden features inside InfraNodus, but you can also do it with any other software, is if you look into the insight panel here in the analytics, and then you look at the latent topical brokers. Why this is interesting is because these are the nodes that have the lowest number of connections per influence. So basically, between the centrality is divided by degree, and if you have a very high influence per one unit of degree, then it means that you're using your connections pretty efficiently. And then we remove the most influential nodes. So for example, obviously there is a correlation between the number of degrees and the influence. So if we remove these three, what happens is that those nodes, they tend to be maybe not so evidently influential, like especially this one. Look, this element has very little influence in the network. However, we call him latent topical brokers because he's the only one connecting the network to one character here, Jondrette. And nobody else is connecting the network to this character. There is also this one, for instance, here, Marielle. He's quite important because he's connecting the whole network to a whole cluster of nodes which no one else is connecting this network to. You could also go through these two characters, but they're not connected to these ones here, you know, so this is why Muriel is quite influential. Then you have also this one. He's connecting the network to these two characters, and that one here, who's connecting the network to the characters that no one else is connecting it to. So basically, these are the nodes with the highest influence per degree, and they will be quite important if you want to analyze what are the important elements in the network that might have not so much influence in the global sense, but that are still influential because they manage to connect the network to the nodes which would otherwise be disconnected from it. And sometimes, of course, it depends on what are the actual insights you're looking for. You know, if you just want to get a general overview, this information might be not so interesting, but if you're analyzing a social network, and for instance, let's say with InfraNodus, you can analyze a Twitter social network of a certain hashtag or something like that, and then you want to see, like, okay, who are the accounts that maybe have not so many connections but who are connected to very important people. So this would be the list of the nodes to look into, and you can read more about it if you click on the question mark here. I will demonstrate actually how you can use Twitter network analysis and how you can use the same approach with the text, because it can be interesting to translate it into another context. I will just show you quickly what other parameters you have here in the analytics panel. So this is quite interesting because especially if you're analyzing text where the sequence or the narrative is important, the emerging topics are the nodes that became influential towards the end of the process. So for example, if this was a chronological sequence, let's say it's a text or even a record of social interactions that happened in time, these would be the ones that became influential towards the end of this data set. So this can be interesting if you're analyzing graphs that have important chronological data. Here you also have a list of bigrams, top relations, which can also be exported. And also if your graph is directed, it can be directed or undirected. And then in the stats, you have all the parameters for every node. So for example, degree, frequency, between the centrality, which topic it belongs to. By the way, this is, I think, the measure that I was talking about, which shows the relationship of between the centrality to degree, so kind of like the importance of influence. And you can also download it in CSV or Excel here and analyze it using any other tool. These are the main parameters. You also have an interesting measure here, which is showing the network structure, and it's based on the modularity of the network. So how pronounced the community structure is inside, how well influence is distributed among all the different clusters in the graph, whether there is one component or several components, what is the degree, the density of the graph, and based on all of these parameters, it identifies the structure of the network. Is it diversified? Is it focused? Is it biased? Or is it dispersed? And it shows the same thing here, just from a different perspective. Mine barrel immunity high, so that means the network is diverse. It means it's not so easy to penetrate it, because if you enter even, let's say, through here, it's an influential node, it will take you quite some time to spread through the whole network, to meet everyone in the network. If you're talking about a text or discourse, it's going to be the same. Let's say you're analyzing a political discourse. If this is a network of a political discourse and you want to analyze how susceptible this discourse is to a certain ideology, this would be quite a useful index, this network structure index, because if the network was too focused, it means that it is very interconnected, so it's very biased in a sense to certain nodes in the graph. And if it was dispersed, it would look like a lot of disjointed islands, and that would mean that you cannot really infiltrate this network, because it consists of disconnected bits and pieces of information. Actually, what was interesting was when we analyzed poetry and newspaper articles, they have very different structure. If you analyze poetry, it's very dispersed. If you analyze a well-formed newspaper article, it tends to be very interconnected. If you analyze political discourses, they tend to be even more connected, especially if they're highly ideological. So this is a nice measure of the level of bias in text, but not the kind of bias which is showing you whether it's right-wing or left-wing or negative or positive, but more whether it tends to focus on a certain topic or whether it represents a really diverse point of view. And here is where InfraNodus analysis of a text graph can be very useful and interesting, because this is how you can use it to actually measure a sort of the level of ecology in the discourse, whether it's trying to sell a certain idea, which is sometimes also very important, or whether it's trying to represent different points of view at the same time. I'm going to show you how it works in a second. First, I will just check whether we have any comments or questions. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them on YouTube or on Facebook or on Twitter using the hashtag InfraNodus. I will be checking all those, so If you have any questions during this session, if you would like me to look into any use case, feel free to send it to me right now in real time, and we can do that. I will just quickly check what's going on in the comments if we have anyone asking, and then we will move on to talk about more questions during this session. Talk about more ways of using the analysis. Okay, so let's move on. I will now demonstrate how you can use the same approach with the text, and then I will show how you can use the same approach with the Twitter social network. So for example, if we talk about a text, one easy thing to do can be actually to analyze the current discourse on Twitter. This is always a good example. There is an app, an InfraNodus for that. You open it from the apps page, click on Twitter, and if you type something in, it's going to make a search for that query. If you don't type anything in, it's just going to analyze the most popular tweets from the last 7 days selected by Twitter. So these are the tweets that Twitter thinks are most relevant at the moment. You can also change those parameters here. You can change the language, whether you want to analyze only hashtags or words, whether you want to analyze the social network or the discourse networks, only the language or only the connections between people. You can also choose to have the most recent conversations. You can even make a list of Twitter users and analyze users from that list. But here we have a visualization of the current discourse on Twitter, which are the most popular tweets at the moment, and this is a text network analysis of them. Again, some of you already have seen this approach. I'm going to demonstrate now kind of like the basics of the analysis first for those who haven't seen how we do this before, but I will go through it very quick and then show some advanced techniques how you could approach this analysis in a different way. So again, we have a visualization of the Twitter network here. We have the most influential elements. I'm happy to see that finally there is something else other than Trump inside, because usually he was quite good in overtaking the discourse, and then now it's kind of like much more diverse. You have stuff about music, performance, what's happening in the world, Grammy Awards, I think, somewhere, and so on, So you have quite a diverse network, and actually here it shows you that the network structure is dispersed, and this is because there are many different topics present within this discourse. They're quite distinct from one another, so it means they use a really different set of words and vocabularies. And if you want to see what's happening in one of them, so for example, here I can click on this little red square and see in which context the most influential nodes in this cluster I use. This is pop, Grammy nomination. So I see that, okay, there is Grammy Awards, and there is a lot of tweets about that. These are the most influential nodes. By the way, as you can see, InfraNodus can also analyze emojis, which can be quite interesting. Would be great to analyze how people respond to comments or to posts on Instagram, what kind of emojis tend to be used together. Can do this sort of emotional analysis. And then, as I said, the next step is to go on the insight panel, look at the structural gap that InfraNodus proposes. So in this case, it's these two clusters. Well, you can also click reveal the gap, and it's going to show you the structural gap in the graph. So which two clusters, two communities of nodes could be connected that are not yet very well connected. So here it's proposing what's the connection between Grammy nomination and all these dealings of the President Trump with the elections, Biden in all the states, how they're contesting the results and so on. Not so obvious, the relation, but this is where new ideas are usually born, So for example, you might actually think, okay, what could be the connection between those two? What's the connection between the statement here? InfraNodus chooses the statement with the highest relevance to that topic. Here someone is talking about Trump and how he is going to go down as the first president to do everything he said he was going to do. Okay, so something about Trump. and then Grammy Awards and the awards for the best performance. So for example, you could think of the different ways to mediatize something, how different events and politicians use media to push out their content, and this might be some kind of meta insight about this discourse, which can be nevertheless quite interesting to apply in your analysis. And then you can also look at the Latin topical brokers, so these nodes that are maybe not the most influential ones, but are quite interesting because they connect the general discourse to some of the ideas that would be otherwise a little bit lost inside. Okay, then you have also this possibility to reveal the non-obvious, so you remove all the most influential nodes, and then you see what's hiding behind them. So you see there is a World Save America, President, Michigan, LA, Pop Domination Group, National Member, and so on. So you have all these different clusters of topics, and then you can reiterate and use this analysis. Now I'm going to show you also something that we've just recently added in the analysis tool, which is especially good for people who are not so much aware of how graphs work. So this map is quite important here because it demonstrates what kind of process we want to take our users on when they use InfraNodus, you know. So for example, let's say if you're writing a text from scratch, you know, how could you develop the discourse in a way that it would be the most diverse possible? And here it starts from this idea that when you just start writing your text, it's kind of dispersed, like we don't yet know what you're going to say. And you will start from one single element. So this is why here it's focused on singularities, and it's disrupting because you don't yet have a coherent set of ideas that you're talking about. So you're kind of focused on one idea, you're biased on that idea, and then you start developing it. When you start developing this idea, you start to add more elements. So this is why we have here focus on multiplicity. So you increase the number of elements in the graph. So for example, you're writing about a certain topic and you're adding more and more concepts inside, and then you start to connect those concepts together. So this is why you're connecting, and you are multiplying the number of ideas and concepts that you have. Then at some point, once you connected them sufficiently, you focus on something. So this is where you go on to the second stage. And in terms of the network structure, you're in the medium modularity, or what we call focused in the InfraNodus network structure score. This is when you have sufficiently focused on several concepts, and now it's time to develop this discourse further. And one of the ways to do that is if you kind of still are connecting ideas, but you focus on only one of the ones that you've already talked about. So for example, you kind of zoom in on one of the topics that you covered, and this is why you go to stage 3, and by zooming in on this one topic, or maybe on several topics that you already covered, you start to kind of like expand them further and to make your text more precise and more detailed. So again, from this singularity, you are focusing on multiplicities, and you are also making less connections in the text, or you're kind of connecting your ideas in a different way that you didn't think of before. So there's this motion towards dispersal again. And then once you dispersed again, so you covered enough ground, you went to the periphery of your ideas, you mentioned some interesting thoughts, then you start to focus again, and here you focus on singularity, and then you start to connect those bigger clusters again. And you kind of go in this process, reiterating over and over again. And to demonstrate how it works in a practical way, I will show you this new feature which we built into InfraNodus recently. So it's the live ideation tool. You open this tool, and you have this helper here, which is going to give you exactly the advice that you need to make your discourse evolve in this way that I've just demonstrated. So for example, I'm going to say that I'm interested to learn about machine learning. And this can really be done in a free style way. You know, you can use it to brainstorm, or when you have a meeting with the team, you know, you can just use the tool for that. So then InfraNodus directly proposes you to make a connection. It says, okay, add more data, maybe something different machine learning. So you can get some interesting insights. So it understands that you don't have so much data, and it just proposes you to think of something else. So why you're interested about machine learning? Is there something that you're interested in? So for example, I'm interested in analyzing time series using machine learning. I type this in. The recommendation tool, you see it's going further in this 8-like dynamics that I showed you before. Now it proposes me to connect things. So I have enough singularities. Now it proposes me to make a connection between this interested time series and machine learning. So can you think of a connection of being interested in the time series and machine learning? So what can machine learning do for time series analysis? And then I can answer, I would be curious to know how we can analyze and detect chaotic variability in time series using machine learning. Add this inside, and then it says, okay, so can you think of more connections? So we still need to develop the discourse further. This is why it proposes us to think of the connections between these two different distinct clusters that exist in the text, analyzing time series and machine learning. So can we add more? So I can say that, for instance, heart rate variability can indicate if the state of a system, human body, is healthy, normal, or whether it deviates into a pathology. Maybe something like this could be applied to any other process. Okay, add this information, and then it proposes me to inspect the graph to check the essence tab, so here in the analytics panel, to see if we can reveal some interesting patterns. So now it proposes me to look at the graph and to think of more connections. You see I can even click on the proceed button, and it's going to propose me what connections I could make. So for example, time series, machine learning, and then system state human. So what about machine learning and the human body? Are there any interesting ideas that can be derived from that? So for example, I can even make a note to myself. Maybe there is some research how machine learning is used for analyzing the human body. For example, physical performance, health, mental health, and so on. Add this into the graph, and here the interesting thing happens, that InfraNodus detected that the graph is diversified, and just like I showed you in this previous analysis, we are now in the state where we made already enough disruptions in the discourse. So now it's time to make connections between them. And this is why InfraNodus is saying now that the graph is diversified. So can you focus on bridging the gaps between those clusters, analyze machine learning, so the analysis used in machine learning, and human body, or maybe connect the main terms, human body analyze. So I can even click on proceed so that InfraNodus selects those nodes for me, and then think of the connection. So how can I use machine learning to analyze human body? For instance, heart rate variability sensors use machine learning to detect irregular heartbeat patterns. Maybe something like this could be used for physical movement or for a general schedule of a person, their daily timelines, etc. So I'm just brainstorming, writing ideas in using InfraNodus to fantasize, and then it proposes me to look at the graph and to see if I detect any interesting patterns between these topical clusters, variability, heart, analyze, machine learning. So I already know that I'm interested in that, but let's say I don't know what to say next to it. So I can click on proceed, and then InfraNodus will move on and propose me another connection. So for example, here it says, can you click on the Essence tab in the Analytics panel? And if I click on the proceed button, it will do it for me. And can you think of the connection between physical schedule pattern and human body? So how can you affect human body by analyzing its physical movement pattern? And then I can add more information. There is some research. Yamada. I remembered about this research now, where they detected that a calm person has chaotic itinerancy in their movement naturally, but when they get anxious, the pattern of movement changes, and so on. So you see, it's kind of like an approach. This helper tool is actually leading you through all these advanced ways of doing analysis of a graph in real time, using most influential elements, using the main topical groups, identifying interesting connections, and proposing you to think how you could apply this to your particular data set. And you can click on, so here it's proposing you to think of the connection between the nodes in the structural gap, and then again analyze the Essence tab, see if I can get inspired by looking at some new patterns. And here it proposes me, even if I go on and I click proceed, it says, okay, remove the most influential elements. So you talked about the body, the physical movement and analysis a lot, just remove them from the graph and it will do it for me. And then see what else you can focus on. So for example, here now I remove them and the graph becomes too biased towards essential nodes, chaotic variability of humans. So it proposes me to think of the connection between detect chaotic movement and pathology. So maybe read more about pathologies, human body behavior, and the relation of those to chaotic itinerancy of movement. As you can see, we're adding more stuff. Then it says return the deleted nodes and reiterate. So basically, it leads you through this kind of methodology of analyzing the graph, of making use of all these different elements that you have in the insight panel. But if you don't know so much which elements to focus on, then you can use this feature and perform analysis this way. There is a question here on YouTube. Are we able to see Twitter hashtags update in real time? Yes, we can do that. In fact, if I come back to the Twitter visualization, I can show you here. If you have a Pro or Enterprise account, you can turn on the live updates. And I think you can turn on every minute if you are an Enterprise user. But normally for this kind of stuff, you can also just get like every hour, because it's the most popular nodes. It's selected by Twitter. So you will have it anyway updated not so often. And then you activate live update, and then every hour it's going to pull in new data and visualize the stuff. You can of course also choose and like a specific hashtag. Let's say if you're at the conference, you can choose a specific hashtag and set it to update every hour or every minute to have always a visualization. And you can even then make this graph public and then embed it using an iframe or a link onto any site anywhere you want. Even share it without the controls, so you just get like a clean visualization version from it. And thank you, Cosme, for this comment about the keynote. I'm glad you're enjoying it. Remember, if you have any questions, you can always ask them on Facebook or YouTube or on Twitter using hashtag InfraNodus. I will come back briefly to this analysis here, just to show you that what we've done so far was when we were writing the graph in real time. And it's really great for ideation if you need to brainstorm, if you need to think together with the team. What's great that once you prepare the graph, you can click on Interpret panel, and then what happens is that you can kind of make like a nice summary of what you wrote. What you wrote. So, for example, I can say that kind of make it a better, well-formed text. So I can say that in my research, I'm interested in using machine learning for analyzing chaotic itinerancy of the human movement. And look what happens once we add stuff in. It covers the nodes that we already mentioned with gray. So the more we cover, the more we touched upon every element in the discourse. And this interpret feature can be used to make like a kind of like a cleaner version of the original nodes of the original brainstorming that we've done. So this is how you can use it as well. One other interesting thing is you can also use this insight panel with an already existing text. So for example, here, if we come back to the visualization of Twitter, we actually have an already existing discourse, but as you can see, this panel here, it proposes you what you could do as the next action. So it tells me here I could inspect the graph, checks the Essence tab, look into all these different topics, see what they're writing about pop nomination Grammy, and also what they're writing about Trump president. So it gives me a way to navigate through the graph using all the analytics insights as well as the visualization to help me better understand what's going on in any discourse. And you can use it with any stuff. Even, let's say, if you visualize the social network on Twitter. So for example, I can write something like Grammys, and let's say I want to make a social network about this. Usually it helps to choose popular plus recent conversations. Okay, so this is the social network, hashtags and words. Okay, let's see if there is any data. And as you can see here, we only have the actual account. So we don't have any more the actual tweets. We only have the connections between the people who are tweeting about Grammys today. And you can use the same approach here. You open this tab and it tells you, okay, inspect the graph, think of these groups here, this group here, Taylor Swift, BTS, Twitter, and recording a CAD. And then this one, party, so it's the political ones. And then, move on, analyze more clusters here and there. Okay, then move on and select the most influential nodes, remove them, see what's hiding behind them, and so on. So basically it's just to say that you can use this tool of advanced graph analysis on any sort of data, be it social network or discourse network, as we've done before. So this is how it works. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. If you feel like something was not covered or you have some specific questions, you can always write them to us directly using our support portal. I'm going to leave a link to it now. Here we go. support.noduslabs.com. If you open this site, then you can see lots of really interesting help articles that talk a lot about different use cases that you could also apply to your work. And there is a live support there which you can use to ask any question or if you need any help using InfraNodus. There is also a section on network analysis as well that we're going to expand, where we'll be talking about different features and different measures, like between centrality, community detection, and so on. I don't know how interested you are to go into technical details, but if you have any requests like that, we can also make a webinar or a section on the support portal that would explain the main measures that you can use to analyze graphs. and maybe also talk about the less often used ones but still interesting ones, like for example those ratios that we mentioned before, the relations of between a centrality to degree and vice versa, which can be quite interesting to detect the latent but still relevant nodes in the network. So all this is possible. Please feel free to try InfraNodus yourself, and also to contact us if you need any help with anything. And if you liked this webinar, put the thumbs up on YouTube, leave us a comment. We will be very happy to hear from you. And also then you will be sure to get informed about the next ones if you subscribe to our channel on YouTube or like our page on Facebook. All this will stay online, of course, and there will be many more coming. If you have any particular requests to focus on a specific topic, feel free to do that. I think one of the next ones that we'll do will be looking into this new feature that I just demonstrated to you today, how you could use this insight generation tool, the recommender for thoughts, you know, the one that leads you through your ideas and helps you make new connections between them. We really like to use it at the moment, and what we want to do is to make a series of interviews with different interesting people, just kind of like interviewing them and using this tool to generate new questions for the interview. Of course, we also would like to connect it to some AI tool that would enable you to actually have a conversation with the tool as if it's a real human being. But I think it's also quite interesting to just have it point your attention to the interesting connections, and then you have to do the job of making the connections between the different ideas. I think this is also as interesting. Thank you very much for your attention and for your time, and I hope you enjoyed this. Let's be in touch. Again, this is our support portal here. This is the hashtag where you can always find us on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. Thank you very much. Have a nice day, and goodbye.